Rain tapped the church windows like fingers on old glass. I sat alone in the back pew, the wood cool under my palms, staring at the stained glass figures that never looked down. This small town in the high plains held me in its grip, isolated stretches of dust and wind, where the conservative weight of Sunday sermons settled heavy as a winter quilt. Everyone knew your business here, or thought they did. I'd come to volunteer, to fill the quiet hours after losses that still ached like fresh frostbite, but it was her I watched now. The pastor's wife, moving through the hymns with a grace that hid something deeper, her hands clutching the hymnal so tight the edges creased under her fingers. Her gaze lingered on me during practice, eyes holding just a beat too long, hinting at tension unspoken, like a fence wire pulled taut. After service, she approached, voice low, vulnerability cracking the air between us. "I've been meaning to ask." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let my mind drift back to how I came to this town, and how she became the center of my small, quiet world. I didn't come here looking for anything but silence. The town sprawled out on the edge of Wyoming's empty quarters, a cluster of weathered, clapboard houses, and a single main street that ended at the railroad tracks. I'd driven in 3 years back, after the kind of losses that make city lights feel like accusations. My mother's slow fade from cancer, a love that slipped away like creek water in drought. The parsonage sat at the town's heart, white paint peeling under endless sun, and the church rose beside it, steeple piercing the flat sky like a question no one asked. I needed the routine, the way duty could anchor you when everything else floated loose. The sensory pull of the place wrapped around me quick. Dust gathered on the Bible pages in the vestibule, fine as talc, carrying the faint must of old paper and forgotten prayers. Polished wood pews gleamed under the hanging lights, their scent sharp like fresh sawn pine mixed with the wax from 100 candles burned low. Morning started with the bell tolling, pulling folks from their chores, farmers in calloused boots, women with aprons still dusted from kitchens. I'd volunteer for the events, folding bulletins or setting out hymnals, feeling the pull of that routine duty like reins on a skittish horse. It grounded me, kept the ache at bay, even as the isolation pressed in. No crowds here, just the wind whistling through cottonwoods, carrying whispers from one porch to the next. The pastor's wife first caught my eye at a potluck in the church basement. Her name was Eleanor, though everyone called her Mrs. Harlan, as if her own name had worn thin over the years. She moved through the tables with a weary smile, ladling potato salad onto plates, her hands steady but lined from decades of service. I watched her fold linens after, the way her fingers worked the fabric smooth, creases vanishing under her touch. There was something in that rhythm, a quiet endurance that mirrored my own hidden edges. Subtle at first, her observations pulled me in. During sermons, her posture stayed stiff under those lace collars, high-necked dresses that buttoned to her throat like armor. But her eyes, they searched the congregation, landing on faces with a hunger she never voiced. Mine, sometimes, in the quiet back row. I felt it, that unspoken thread, like the hum of a distant storm. Our connection built slow through shared tasks, arranging flowers for the altar, her beside me at the sink, stems snapping under shears. Water splashed cool on our wrists, and once, accidental, her hand brushed mine reaching for a vase. The air stilled, thick with the scent of damp earth from the blooms. She didn't pull away quick, just let the moment hang, her breath catching soft. Days blurred into that pattern. I'd show up early for bake sales, kneading dough in the kitchen while she organized trays, her laughter light but edged when the pastor called from the pulpit. We talked in fragments, weather turning, the weight of harvest prayers. But under it, tension simmered, her glances lingering like shadows at dusk. I kept my own truths tucked close, Sapphic paths walked alone in younger years, now buried under this town's watchful sky. Yet, her presence stirred them, a quiet ache blooming in my chest. One evening, clean up after vespers, the church emptied slow. Light faded through the windows, casting long bars across the floor. We wiped down the altar cloths together, the cloth rough under my palms, her near enough that I caught the faint lavender of her soap. Silence had a sound then, heavy as fog rolling in from the fields. She straightened, folding the last linen, and turned to me. The air thickened, unspoken words pressing close. "You've been kind here," she said, voice low, eyes meeting mine without flinching. My heart thudded, vulnerability raw in the dim space. But that's when things shifted, her hand lingering on the table edge, pulling us into something deeper than duty. Just as the first crack of thunder signaled a storm that would trap us together. Eleanor's world unfolded in layers, like the parsonage walls peeled back by years of wind and rain. She'd married young, right out of high school, to the pastor, a match the town saw as solid as the church foundation. Decades stretched behind her, raising 3 kids in that white, clapboard house next to the steeple, where every meal carried the echo of scripture readings. The oldest son had left for college, then vanished into city work. The daughters stayed close, one married to a local rancher, the other teaching Sunday school with the same stiff grace Eleanor wore. Duty defined her days. Meals for the congregation, mending vestments, her life, a quiet orbit around her husband's sermons. I noticed the exhaustion in the small acts, the way it clung to her like dust on windowsills. At the church suppers, she'd stir the communals. Soup in the big cast iron pot, wooden spoon scraping slow against the sides, steam rising thick with onions and carrots from the community garden. Her arms moved steady, but her shoulders sagged, lines etching deeper around her eyes. Sweat beaded on her forehead in the hot kitchen, and she'd wipe it with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint streak of flour. I helped beside her sometimes, chopping herbs that released sharp scents into the air, and I'd catch her pausing, gaze distant, as if the steam carried memories she couldn't voice. Those late-night talks after choir practice pulled us closer, vulnerabilities shared in the emptying hall. Voices faded down the stairs, leaving us with the echo of hymns still hanging in the rafters. She'd linger by the piano, fingers tracing keys without pressing, while I stacked chairs, metal legs scraping soft on the worn floorboards. Her voice cracked then, on regrets she'd buried deep. "I wanted to study art once," she'd say, eyes on the shadowed crucifix above the door. "Paint the canyons at sunset, colors bleeding like they do in dreams." But duty had called louder. Family expectations, the town's gaze, her own fears wrapping tight as barbed wire. I listened, chin on my hand, the air cooling around us, and felt my own truths stir. Hidden Sapphic paths from years back, loves lost to silence. Hints of conflict threaded through her stories, early dreams deferred for the weight of what was expected. She'd talk of college fairs she skipped, the sketchbooks tucked away in a drawer, gathering dust like forgotten prayers. Marriage came quick, a ring exchanged in the same church where we now stood, vows spoken under the same lights that buzzed faint overhead. "It was the right thing," she'd murmur, but her tone carried an edge, sharp as a thorn in soft earth. I mirrored it back, sharing fragments of my own hidden life, not the full map, but enough to echo her ache. The woman I'd loved in my 20s, her laugh like wind through aspens, gone when the world narrowed our choices. "We all bend to something," I'd say, voice low, and she'd nod, the shared weight lightening just a fraction in that quiet space. The sensory pull grew stronger, her presence a current under the surface. One afternoon, during setup for the women's circle, a table wobbled under the weight of coffee urns, threatening to spill. Her hand shot out, warmth steadying the leg, fingers brushing mine as I reached too. Skin met skin, calloused from her chores, and the air turned heavy with unspoken wants, like the press of humidity before a storm breaks. She held there a beat longer than needed, her pulse faint under my touch, eyes flicking up to meet mine. Lavender from her soap mixed with the bitter steam of fresh brew, grounding the moment in something real, tangible. I didn't pull away, letting the heat linger, my chest tightening with the pull of it all. Inciting whispers built in the prayer meetings, glances exchanged across the circle of folding chairs, women bowed heads, voices murmuring petitions for rain or safe harvests, but her eyes would find mine through the veil of lowered lashes, holding steady. Questions edged toward personal then, slipping in like cracks in dry soil. "What keeps you here?" she'd ask after, as we cleared the hymn sheets, her tone casual but probing, like testing fence posts for give. I'd answer honest, solace in the routine, the wide sky that let you breathe, but felt the undercurrent, her curiosity pulling at threads long buried, the town's conservative hum pressed close, elders nodding approval at her devotion, unaware of the tension coiling beneath. One stormy night locked us in the church hall, wind howling against the doors like an uninvited guest. Rain lashed the windows, drumming urgent on the tin roof, forcing us to wait out the worst. Thunder rolled distant, shaking the foundations, and we sat at the long table, candles flickering shadows across her face. The air smelled of damp wool from our coats, mixed with the faint polish of the pews nearby. Conversation turned deeper there. No escape in the downpour. Her words spilling like the water outside, regrets, dreams, the life she'd built on duty's frame. My heart thudded, vulnerability blooming raw as the storm held us, pulling truths to the surface. The storm raged outside, wind whipping branches against the hall walls like accusations. Rain drummed on the roof, steady and urgent, mimicking heartbeats, quickening in the dim light. We sat at the scarred oak table, candles guttering in their holders, wax pooling warm on the wood. Shadows danced across Eleanor's face, softening the lines etched by years of holding steady. The air hung thick with the scent of wet earth seeping through cracks, mixed with the faint smoke from the flames. No one else lingered. The town huddled in their homes, leaving us to this forced intimacy. She started slow, her confession uncoiling like a rope frayed at the ends. Fingers tracing the table's grain, she spoke of a lifetime, suppressing feelings that never fit the mold. Marriage had been the expected path. Young love in the churchyard, vows traded under blooming lilacs. The town's approval sealing it like mortar and brick. But beneath the parsonage routines, doubts had simmered, buried under layers of duty and scripture. "I did what was right," she said, voice low, eyes on the flickering wick, raised the children, stood by him through sermons and silences, but some nights, alone in that bed, I'd lie awake, wondering about paths not taken. Her words carried the weight of unspoken wants, Sapphic truths she'd glimpsed in stolen glances at women's circles, then shoved down like seeds too wild for the garden. I listened, the rain's rhythm pulling me in, my own chest tightening with the echo of it. The candlelight caught the silver in her hair, loose strands framing her face, and I saw the exhaustion there, raw as peeled bark. She leaned forward, elbows on the ice maw, table the wood creaking under her weight. Outside, thunder grumbled low, shaking the windows, but inside, her voice cut clearer. "It's like living half-shadowed," she murmured. "Always the wife, the mother, the helper. Never just me." The confession hung, vulnerable, her breath visible in the cooling air, carrying hints of the mint tea we'd shared earlier. Then the question emerged, leaning close over the flickering candle, her eyes locking on mine. "Is it too late for us?" The words landed soft but heavy, like the first drop of rain on parched soil. Us. Not her and the pastor, not the family or the flock. Us. The air stilled, the flame between us steadying for a beat, casting gold on her skin. I felt the world narrow to that space, her gaze unflinching, pulling at threads I'd kept coiled tight. My internal storm hit then, heart thudding hard against my ribs, vulnerability blooming raw in my chest. The rain pounded louder, matching the rush in my ears, and I gripped the table edge, knuckles paling. What did she see in me, the volunteer in the back pew, the woman with her own hidden scars? Time stretched, the storm outside mirroring the one building inside, fears of exposure clashing with the pull of her nearness. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but the weight of the town pressed in, conservative eyes that judged every step off the path. I responded slow, building trust with honest words, no judgment, just a quiet hold. "It's never too late to claim what's yours," I said, voice steady as the candles glow. I shared my Sapphic path then, fragments laid bare in the shadowed hall. The first woman I'd loved, her hands rough from ranch work, kisses stolen in haylofts under star-pricked skies. The ache of hiding it through moves and losses, the isolation of rural silences where truth stayed buried like winter roots. "I walked that road alone for years," I told her, eyes meeting hers without wavering. Felt the pull, fought it, then let it lead. No shame in it, just the hard work of being true. My hand moved across the table, palm up, an invitation, and she took it, fingers cool and trembling, the contact grounding us both. Tension escalated from there, her tears spilling sudden, tracing wet paths down her cheeks. She clutched my hand tighter, nails pressing into skin, the world narrowing to our shared breath, ragged and close. The candle sputtered, smoke curling up, but we didn't move, the rain a curtain sealing us in. Her sobs came quiet at first, muffled against her sleeve, then freer, shoulders shaking as regrets poured out. "I've wasted so much," she whispered, head bowing, the scent of her tears sharp in the air. I shifted closer, arm around her, feeling the warmth of her body cut the chill, her hair brushing my cheek like soft grass in wind. Vulnerability met vulnerability. No words needed. Just the hold that said I saw her, all of her. The storm eased eventual, rain tapering to a drip from the eaves, but the shift lingered. Days after, avoidance mixed with stolen proximity in the church routines. She'd pass me in the vestibule, eyes flicking away quick, cheeks flushing under the lace collar, then linger at the altar during setups, our hands brushing over candlesticks. The air thickened each time, unspoken tension coiling like wire in the fences lining town roads. I walked the empty fields after, mud sucking at my boots, grounding the mixed ache in my chest. Hope flickering against the fear of what came next. She tried to retreat into duty, voice strained during announcements, but the pull remained, drawing us back in quiet moments, the question echoing like distant thunder. She tried to retreat after that night, pulling back into the lines of her life like a horse shying from the bit. At Sunday services, she'd sit rigid beside the pastor, her hand on his arm, overly attentive, fingers pressing into his sleeve as if anchoring herself there. Her voice strained during the responsive readings, cracking on the edges of familiar verses, the words tumbling out too quick, like stones, skipping over frozen creek water. I'd watch from the back pew, the wood hard under me, feeling the shift in the air, the way her eyes scanned the congregation but skipped mine, deliberate as a door closing soft. The church filled with the scent of fresh varnish from the repaired choir loft, but under it, tension hummed, her retreat a wall I couldn't breach yet. I processed it openly, walking the empty fields beyond town after dark, mud sucking at my boots with each step, grounding the mixed ache in my chest. The plains stretched flat under a low sky, wind carrying the sharp tang of sagebrush, and I'd stop at a fence line, palms pressing into the rough wire, letting the cold bite steady me. Hope flickered there, warm as a hidden ember, but fear coiled tight. What if her question had been a storm passing, leaving only silence? Vulnerability sat heavy, my own Sapphic truths, stirring like dust in the gusts, the pull toward her warring with the isolation of this place. No one to confide in, just the vast land holding my steps, each one echoing the uncertainty she carried too. Try-fail cycles marked our days, small attempts at nearness, crumbling under the weight. In the church kitchen during baking for the midweek prayer group, we'd knead dough side by side, flour dusting our aprons like fresh snow on ridges. Her shoulder would brush mine accidental, warmth cutting through the chill draft from the open window, and for a beat, her hand would linger on the rolling pin, fingers close to mine over the pale mound. Then she'd pull away, cheeks flushing deep as autumn maples, muttering about the oven heat, eyes dropping to the scarred counter. I'd feel the spark fade, my chest tightening, but I'd nod, letting the moment breathe, no demand in my silence. Another time, stacking trays of cooling biscuits. Her arm grazed my waist, the contact electric, air thickening with the yeast's rise, and unspoken want. She froze, then stepped back quick, wiping her hands on her skirt, the fabric whispering against her legs. Failure stung, but each try pulled us closer, threads fraying but not breaking. Community scrutiny sharpened it all, whispers threading through coffee hour like smoke from a damp fire. Women clustered by the urn, cups steaming with bitter brew, their voices low as they eyed Eleanor across the room, her laughter too bright when the pastor spoke, her posture straight but brittle. "She's carrying the load again," one murmured, stirring sugar slow, the spoon clinking against porcelain. But I caught the undercurrents, sidelong glances at me too, the volunteer who lingered too long in her shadow. The town's conservative hum pressed in, elders nodding from their pews, scripture their shield against anything off the path. Her isolation amplified the internal war, the parsonage a cage of expectations, no escape in the wide fields. She'd stand alone after, folding napkins with hands that trembled faint, the paper crinkling under her grip, her eyes searching the emptying hall for something solid. Deepening empathy grew in those cracks, my words, a quiet bridge without demand. One afternoon, clearing the altar after a funeral luncheon, the air heavy with Lily's cloying sweetness and the faint rot of grief, I shared past heartbreaks, validating her confusion like soil turned for new seed. "I lost someone once," I said, stacking chairs slow, metal scraping soft. "A woman who saw me clear, but the world narrowed us out, family silences, jobs that demanded straight lines. It ached like drought, parching everything." She paused, cloth in hand, wiping a vase rim, her breath catching. I didn't push, just let the story hang, mirroring her own buried pulls, the Sapphic whispers she'd suppressed under duty's yoke. "Confusion's no sin," I added, voice low as the settling dust. "It's the ground shifting, finding your footing." Her eyes met mine then, soft with the weight shared. No judgment in the space between, just the hold of understanding, steady as canyon walls. Sensory intimacy wove through it, her scent lingering after close work, lavender soap clinging to the air like morning mist on grass. We'd sort donations in the vestry, boxes heavy with cast-off clothes smelling of mothballs and faint perfume, her arm brushing mine as we reached for the same folded sweater. The warmth of her skin cut the room's chill, air thickening with the press of bodies in the narrow space, her breath quickening near my ear. Once, her fingers grazed my wrist, adjusting a stack, pulse thudding faint under the touch, and the world narrowed to that heat, unspoken wants coiling tight as wire. She'd flush, step back, but the trace remained, her soap on my sleeve, the ghost of nearness pulling me through the evenings, heart open to the ache. The pull and push wore on, duty's reins chafing raw. But a family event forced confrontation. The annual church picnic under cottonwoods by the creek, tables groaning with pies and fried chicken, laughter echoing off the water. Eleanor's daughters arrived with husbands and grandkids, the pastor beaming from the grill, smoke curling thick. She moved through it all, serving plates with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows on the grass, her facade cracked under the pressure. I caught her by the edge of the trees, away from the crowd, her hands twisting a napkin, voice breaking soft. "I can't keep this up," she whispered, the creek murmuring behind, pulling us toward the break, waiting in the dark. The public dinner that fall exposed the strains running through her like fault lines in dry earth. The church hall overflowed with the annual harvest feast, long tables draped in white cloths, laden with roasts steaming under foil, cornbread golden and cracked, bowls of gravy thick with sage from the hills. Folks crowded in, voices rising over the clink of forks on plates, the air heavy with the scent of roasted meat and apple cider spiced sharp. Eleanor sat at the head table with the pastor, her dress high-necked and deep blue, lace at the cuffs brushing her wrists as she passed the potatoes. Her laughter rang out when he joked about the bountiful yield, but it came forced, brittle as thin ice on a stock pond, cracking at the edges. I watched from midway down, fork idle in my hand, the wooden chair hard under me. Her eyes sought mine across the table, flicking quick through the candlelight, holding a beat before darting away, the pull unspoken, but electric. The room buzzed with small talk. Farm yields, coming snow. But under it, tension coiled, her posture straight but trembling faint, like a post straining against wind. She excused herself early, slipping out to the side door, the hinges creaking soft behind her. I followed after a minute, the cool night air hitting like a slap after the hall's warmth, carrying the faint rot of fallen leaves from the maples lining the path. The church garden waited in shadow, gravel crunching under my boots, the low fence sagging where roses had overgrown. She stood by the stone bench, arms wrapped tight around herself, the wind tugging at her skirt. Midnight had passed, the town quiet save for distant coyote calls echoing off the ridges. I approached slow, not speaking, just letting my presence settle like dew on grass. She turned then, eyes red-rimmed in the faint moonlight, and the private breakdown came, sobs muffled by the night wind whipping through the branches overhead. Revelations poured out in the hush, her words tumbling like rocks down a slope. Buried desires, surfaced, raw. Sapphic truths she'd pressed down for decades, now clawing free under the weight of it all. "It's like I've been yoked to a life that wasn't mine," she whispered, voice cracking, hands twisting the hem of her sleeve. Marriage felt heavy then, a yoke chafing the shoulders, decades of standing beside him in pulpits, in parlors, raising kids on scripture and silence, her own wants trampled like weeds in the garden path. "I saw it in girls at school, the way they'd laugh together, touch without thinking," she said, tears tracing cold paths down her cheeks. But I chose the path laid out. Wife, mother, pillar, now it chokes me. Every sermon a reminder of what I buried. The wind carried her confession, leaves skittering across the gravel, and I felt the echo in my bones. The rural silences that hid so much. Physical closeness bridged the gap, my arms around her under the stars pricking the black sky above. She leaned into me, body trembling against mine, the warmth of her cutting the chill like sun breaking through clouds. Her head rested on my shoulder, hair soft against my neck, carrying that lavender trace mixed with the night's damp. I held steady, hands rubbing slow circles on her back, the fabric of her dress rough under my palms, her breaths slowing ragged into something shared. The garden held us, roses nodding in the breeze, thorns sharp in the dark, but in that embrace, the world narrowed to us, heat blooming where fear had rooted deep. No words at first, just the press of bodies, her fingers clutching my shirt, pulling closer. The intimacy, a quiet rebellion against the yoke she'd worn. My role stayed steady, empathy, mirroring my own journey through the rural silences that swallowed truths whole. "I know that weight," I murmured, voice low against the wind, chin brushing her temple. Walked empty trails after losing her, the woman who made me see clear, kisses in hidden draws, then gone when the town eyes turned hard. Isolation carves deep, but it also clears space for what's real. I shared the silences I'd endured, nights staring at canyon walls lit by moon, heart thudding with the ache of hidden paths, Sapphic pulls that the land seemed to understand even if people didn't. No demand in my hold, just validation, letting her see the road I'd carved, rough but mine, empathy a lantern in the dark garden. She nodded into my neck, sobs easing, the shared journey lightening the load just enough. Escalating stakes sharpened with hints of town gossip, whispers threading like barbed wire through the fences. The next day, at coffee after service, I caught fragments. Women by the urn murmuring about Eleanor's distant look, eyes flicking toward the parsonage, the words laced with that conservative edge, judgments rooted deep as cottonwood roots. "Something's off with the Harlans," one said, stirring her cup slow, the spoon scraping porcelain. Her fear hit sharp as thorns then, losing everything, the home, the family ties, the role that defined her in this tight-knit stretch of plains. "They'll turn on me," she confided later, voice trembling as we swept the hall, broom bristles whispering over the floor. "The elders, the congregation, I've built my life here, but if they knew—" The isolation amplified it. No city buffers, just the vast fields. Pressing doubts inward, her hands shaking on the broom handle, the air thick with unswept dust. Decisions loomed during the quiet morning chores, the pull toward an irreversible choice growing stronger. We'd meet in the church shed at dawn, light filtering gray through dusty windows, sorting linens that smelled of starch and faint mildew. Her eyes would meet mine over the folds, holding longer now, the facade cracking wider with each shared glance. One morning, as frost rimed the window panes, she paused, cloth in hand, and whispered, "What if I can't stay?" The words hung, heavy as the gathering clouds outside, pulling us toward the break waiting, the choice sharpening like a blade on whetstone. Word count, 886. Crisis peaked that night. The arguments echo carrying from the parsonage like thunder rolling low over the ridges. I'd been walking the edge of town, boots crunching frost-laced gravel, the air sharp with the bite of coming winter, when the raised voices cut through the quiet. The pastor's tone boomed first, heavy with scripture's edge, then Eleanor's, strained and breaking, words lost to the wind but the hurt clear as a snapped fence rail. My heart thudded hard, pulling me closer despite the chill seeping through my coat, the parsonage lights spilling yellow onto the lawn, shadows shifting behind the curtains like ghosts stirring. I stopped at the garden gate, hands gripping the cold iron, vulnerability raw in my chest. What right did I have to stand here, witness to her unraveling? But the pull won, drawing me near as the door slammed open, her silhouette framed in the glow. She spotted me there, eyes wide in the dim porch light, and waved me in without a word, the screen door creaking shut behind us. The kitchen waited shadowed, counters cluttered with half-washed dishes from supper, the sink dripping steady into the basin, a rhythm matching her quick breaths. She moved to the back counter, pulling open drawers with hands that shook, voice trembling but resolute as she started packing essentials, a worn sweater, a few books dog-eared from quiet nights, her mother's old locket glinting in the low light. "I can't stay," she said, words spilling fast, folding clothes into a canvas bag that smelled of mothballs and faint lavender. The air hung thick with the scent of cooling stew from the stove, onions and herbs lingering like regrets she was leaving behind. Her choice hung raw, decades of duty cracking under the weight, Sapphic truths she'd buried now pushing free, her posture straight but the tremble in her fingers betraying the storm inside. Intimate farewell to her old life came slow, her hand reaching out to touch my face, palm cool against my cheek, thumb tracing the line of my jaw like mapping a familiar trail. The kitchen narrowed to us, the drip of the faucet fading, her eyes locking on mine with a desperation that twisted deep. Lips brushed mine then, desperate and soft, tasting of salt from unshed tears, and the mint of evening tea, the kiss pulling heat through the chill. I leaned in, arms wrapping her waist, feeling the curve of her body yield against mine, the fabric of her dress thin under my hands. It wasn't hurried, just a quiet claiming, her breath mingling with mine, carrying the weight of years, unspoken. The parsonage walls seemed to close in, photos of kids and grandkids staring from the mantel, but in that moment, her touch burned away the shadows, vulnerability blooming open between us. External judgments hit quick after, the phone ringing shrill from the living room, church elders' voices crackling through the line, conservative walls closing in like barbed wire, tightening around a stray. "What's this about leaving?" one barked, tone laced with that unyielding scripture fire, the kind that scorched doubts before they could root. Eleanor held the receiver loose, her face paling under the kitchen bulb, the elder's words echoing, duty to husband, to flock, to the path laid out in black and white. Another call followed, her daughter's voice sharp with worry. "Mama, think of the family," the conservative undercurrents of town life pressing hard, no room for paths that bent. She hung up trembling, the phone clattering back to its cradle, and sank against the counter, the bag at her feet forgotten for a beat. The isolation amplified it. this small world where leaving meant exile. Whispers already threading through phone lines like wind through dry grass. I held her through the tremors then, pulling her close on the worn linoleum, her body shaking against mine, warmth cutting the draft from the back door. Vulnerability poured from me, sharing fears of the uncertain path ahead, no map for two women stepping off the straight line, rural silences that could swallow us whole or hold us steady. "I've walked alone before," I whispered, hand stroking her hair, strands soft and tangled from the night's pull. Lost her to the same walls, the judgments that cut deeper than thorns. But this, us, it's worth the unknown, the empty miles ahead. My voice cracked soft, heart thudding open, mirroring her ache without shielding it, the kitchen clock ticking steady like a pulse we shared. She clung tighter, sobs muffled into my shoulder, the scent of her soap grounding us amid the chaos, empathy, a bridge over the fears rising like floodwater. Emotional convergence built from there, bodies pressing close on the kitchen floor, the heat of truth burning away doubts like sun-scorching mist from the fields. Her hands roamed my back, fingers pressing firm, pulling me down until we lay tangled, breaths quickening in the shadowed space. The linoleum cool under us, but her skin warm, sliding against mine as layers shifted, dress hiking up, my shirt untucked, the intimacy raw and unhurried. Lips met again, deeper now, tongues tracing the edges of hidden wants, her moan low against my neck, vibrating through the quiet. Heat pooled low, thighs pressing together, the friction, building slow like embers catching in dry tinder, Sapphic fire long suppressed, now flaring free. No words, just the press of hips, hands exploring curves she'd only dreamed of. Vulnerability fusing us in that desperate hold. Doubts flickered but faded, truth's warmth chasing them out, her body arching into mine, release coming quiet and shared, breaths ragged in the aftermath. Dawn crept in eventual, gray light filtering through the kitchen window, painting the counters in soft hues. We rose slow, her bag packed full now, essentials clutched like lifelines. She glanced back once at the parsonage door, the life she'd known waiting silent, then stepped out with me, gravel crunching under our boots as the truck tires bit the drive. The new road opened ahead, fields stretching empty under the rising sun, pulling us toward whatever waited beyond the town's tight horizon. We escaped to my small home on the town's edge, a weathered cabin tucked against a rise of hills, where the wind carried less judgment and more the scent of pine breaking free. The truck rumbled to a stop in the gravel drive, dust settling slow around the tires as dawn painted the sky in muted pinks. Eleanor sat silent beside me, her bag clutched in her lap, fingers white-knuckled on the strap. The parsonage, miles behind, but its shadow long. I led her inside, the door creaking open to rooms sparse and lived in, books stacked on a pine table, a quilt draped over the couch from years of solitary evenings. Unpacking happened amid unpacked emotions, her hands trembling as she set the locket on the mantel, eyes tracing the empty spaces like mapping unfamiliar trails. I brewed coffee strong, the pot hissing on the stove, steam curling thick with the bitter earth of grounds, and we sat at the scarred kitchen table, her gaze distant on the window where fields rolled out endless. Relief flickered in her posture, shoulders easing a fraction, but regrets lingered, heavy as unpacked boxes in the corner, the life she'd left echoing in every quiet breath. Bittersweet adjustments wove through our days, her lingering regrets, mixed with relief in the simple routines that grounded us. Mornings started slow, light filtering through lace curtains I'd hung myself, casting patterns on the floorboards worn smooth by my steps alone. She'd rise hesitant, padding to the kitchen in one of my old shirts, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the fabric loose on her frame. We'd share toast, butter melting slow, the crunch of crust breaking the hush, but her eyes would drift to the horizon, voice soft with what-ifs about the kids, the church whispers, chasing her even here. "I wonder if they hate me now," she'd murmur, knife scraping jam across bread, the sweet tang filling the air. Relief came in the small freedoms. No sermons to prepare, no eyes watching her every move. And I'd nod, hand covering hers brief, the warmth steadying us both. Evenings brought the pull of old habits, her folding napkins, neat out of instinct, but she'd pause, letting them rumple, a quiet rebellion blooming in the mess. The cabin held our adjustments, walls thin but kind, the rural quiet amplifying the mix. Regrets ache like thorns in soft soil, relief blooming slow beside it. Building hope marked our steps forward, shared walks on the trails behind the cabin, hands clasped openly, the path winding through draws where cottonwoods whispered overhead. We'd start at midday, sun warm on our backs, boots kicking up dust fine as flour, the air sharp with sage and the faint rot of fallen leaves. Her fingers laced with mine, firm now, no pulling away, the contact a thread pulling us through the uncertainty. Community edges softened gradual, the town's tight knot loosening just enough. Folks at the general store nodding as we passed. No outright stares, just a pause in their talk. One afternoon, hiking the ridge trail, wind tugging our hair, she squeezed my hand tighter. "This feels possible," she said, voice low against the gusts, eyes on the valley below where the church steeple pricked the sky distant. Hope built in those miles. Her laughter freer when a rabbit bolted from the brush, the sound cutting the wind like sunlight through clouds. We'd stop at overlooks, sitting on rocks warm from the sun, sharing breaths that mingled easy, the pull toward tomorrow steady as the land under us. Some acceptance emerged quiet, old friends offering small acts of understanding that eased the raw edges. At the feed store one morning, the clerk, an elder's widow who'd known me from volunteer days, slid our bags across the counter without a word, but her eyes held soft, a nod that said she saw without condemning. "Good to see you both out," she murmured, the words simple but weighted, like rain after drought. Eleanor's daughter visited once, pulling up in her truck with dust trailing, face tight but thawing over coffee at our table. No sermons, just questions edged, gentle. "You look lighter, Mama," and a hug that lingered, the scent of her ranch life, clinging, hay, and horse sweat. The conservative walls didn't crumble, but cracks let light in, quiet nods from women at the post office. A shared recipe slipped into Eleanor's hand during a chance meeting. It wasn't fanfare, just the rural way, understanding growing slow as fence mending, one post at a time, softening the isolation that had pressed so hard. The deepened bond filled our evenings by the fire, vulnerabilities shared like well-worn stories passed hand to hand. Logs crackled in the stone hearth, flames casting gold on the walls, the scent of burning cedar thick and grounding. We'd sit close on the rug, knees touching, her head on my shoulder as shadows danced. She'd talk then, regrets, spilling free, the years of suppressed pulls, glances at women's hands during quilting bees, dreams deferred like seeds left too long in the dark. I'd mirror it, sharing my own silences, the woman lost to judgments that cut deep. Nights walking, empty fields with heart thudding raw. "We carry it together now," I'd say, fingers tracing her arm, skin warm under my touch, the fire's heat mirroring the one building between us. Vulnerabilities wove tighter, her hand finding mine in the dim, pulling me close, lips brushing soft, the kiss deepening slow like embers catching, bodies pressed together on the couch, hands exploring with a certainty born of truth, heat pooling in the quiet, moans low against the crackle. No rush, just the bond deepening, Sapphic paths converging in the cabin's hush. Realistic hurdles surfaced still, occasional doubts rising like fog in the draws, but empathy anchored our quiet resilience. One night, after a letter from the church elders arrived, words stern on lined paper, she'd withdraw to the porch, staring at the dark fields, voice small. "What if I chose wrong?" she'd ask, arms wrapped tight, the chill seeping through her sweater. I'd join her, blanket draped over us both, pulling her back against me, the wool rough and warm. "Doubts come like weather," I'd whisper, breath warm on her neck, hand steady on her waist. We weather them side by side. Empathy poured steady, validating the pull of old ties without letting them drag us under, her body relaxing into mine, resilience rooting deep as the pines outside. Hurdles passed, leaving us stronger, the cabin a haven against the winds. Sunrise caught us one morning over the fields, light spilling gold across the grass, our silhouettes intertwined on the porch steps, arms wrapped easy. The future unfolded there, uncertain but open, hands clasped as the day broke, pulling us forward into whatever paths waited. The parsonage door clicked shut behind us that final time, the sound final as frost cracking earth. No turning back now, the past sealed like a letter never reopened. Eleanor paused on the gravel, hand in mine, the morning light spilling over the fields, our shadows stretching long and intertwined toward the horizon. Relief washed through her eyes, mixed with the ache of what was left. But in that grip, our new path felt solid, rooted deep. The cabin waited ahead, smoke curling from the chimney like a quiet welcome, evenings by the fire promising more shared truths, bodies close under quilts, worn soft. Doubts might whisper still, like wind through the pines, but empathy held us, her head on my shoulder, breaths sinking slow, Sapphic homes blooming late but fierce. If you've carried hidden truths through years of duty, the weight of unspoken wants pressing like unspoken rain, share your story below. Your words might light someone's path, easing the rural silences we all know. Subscribe for more tales of women claiming late-blooming homes in each other, finding resilience in the quiet turns.